In order to help facilitate the nation's post-pandemic recovery, economic development organizations need to be firing on all cylinders. That takes adequate funding, but government budgets have also been hit by COVID, and that means flat or even declining public funding for economic development. Private donors are another source of support in these challenging times. Good morning, I'm Julie Roper, Economic Development and Local Government Manager at Dominion Energy. I'm on the NCEDA Board of Directors and have the honor of welcoming everyone to today's webinar, Fundraising in Challenging Times, presented by Convergent Nonprofit Solutions. You'll meet our moderator and panelists in a moment. First, let me thank Convergent Nonprofit Solutions for their support of today's webinar. We're grateful not just for your expertise on this subject and your support of NCEDA. NCEDA's annual sponsors also deserve our thanks. You'll see their names and logos on your screen now. It would be impossible to produce meaningful professional development offerings like this without their generous support of these companies and organizations. And NCEDA appreciates the critical role they play in all our programs. The COVID-19 pandemic has set off fiscal pressures on county, municipal, and state governments, with surging public health and safety expenses growing just as sales and income tax revenues shrink. As in recessions past, many local governments are inclined to constrain economic development spending, and some even seek to cut line items for community marketing, corporate recruitment, business retention, and strategic economic planning. In times of both recession and expansion, private fundraising is an indispensable source of support for most economic development organizations. How is the pandemic presenting both obstacles and opportunities for donor outreach? We have 4 all-stars with us today to answer that and other questions. Today's moderator is Rick Kiernan, a familiar face in North Carolina's economic development circles and former NCEDA board member. Rick is a principal at Convergent Nonprofit Solutions. He joined the fundraising industry in 1996 and has since raised more than $200 million for economic development organizations, chambers of commerce, promise programs, affordable housing organizations, YMCAs, and other nonprofits. Rick's expertise has helped more than 20 economic development programs and chambers across North Carolina. Our panelists include Joanna Helms, my fellow NCEDA board member and director of economic development for the town of Apex; Mac Williams, president of the Alamance Chamber and past president of NCEDA; and Steve Yost, president and CEO of North Carolina's Southeast and also a past president of NCEDA. I think everyone will agree this is an epic lineup of economic development superstars, and we eagerly await their guidance. So I will now turn the webinar over to Rick Kiernan to moderate today's event.
Thank you, Julie. And let's bring up our PowerPoint. All right. I also want to welcome everybody to our webinar today, Fundraising and Challenging Times, and challenging times they are. I don't think it's ever been as important, the work that economic developers are doing, the work that you're doing in the industry. But how do you continue to do it? How do you do even more of it if funding might be at risk? And that's really our topic for today, as Julie described. It's the reason I reached out to these 3 specific panelists, because I think they bring a real unique perspective and very different perspectives on fundraising in challenging times. For example, Mac and Joanna were in the trenches back in 2009 to 2011 in the Great Recession and the recovery, doing active fundraising. I think that is probably the closest thing we've seen as a fundraising company over my 20 some years as what we're experiencing today. Steve wasn't raising money in the Great Recession, but when the state defunded the regional partnerships in 2014, he was thrust into the fundraising world. So he brings a different perspective on fundraising in challenging times. Mac and Joanna were raising money on a countywide basis. Steve is raising money on a regional basis, 18 counties to be specific. Joanna's not necessarily raising money today in her role with Apex Economic Development. She was doing that in Wayne County with WCDA back in the Great Recession. But Mac and Steve are actively talking to investors right now, making sure they maintain that funding and hopefully increase it somewhat. So everybody brings that really unique perspective. What we're going to do at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mac. He's going to give an overview of his fundraising back in the Great Recession and the recovery afterwards, followed by Joanna, followed by Steve. This is going to be a little bit different. We're not looking at a 50-minute webinar with 3 or 4 questions at the end. We're going to wrap up our portion. So we've got a good 30 minutes of Q&A. This is about you guys in the audience, the questions you have about funding to make sure you can get out there and help your communities recover from what we're experiencing right now, both from COVID and the recession we're experiencing. So as we go through this, you'll see in the very bottom, you've got a Q&A box. Start typing in your questions. We have a bunch that were submitted in advance of the webinar. I've got a list of those. I have some of my own, but I want to make sure we answer all of your questions as well. So with that said, Mac, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Rick, and I'm delighted to be part of the program today. Just want to make sure everybody can see and hear me. Is that, am I being able to be seen and heard by all? I hope I am.
I can see you and I can hear you.
Perfect. So I guess as a little bit of context, the organization that we did fundraising for is a private foundation. It's under the under the umbrella of the chamber, but it's a separate legal entity and a 501c3 entity. That's a complementary organization to the chamber, and it's the private vehicle that was set up for private funding to complement public funding that we're getting for economic development that comes to the chamber. So our organization got started in 2005 with a self-led campaign to raise $600,000 over a 3-year period. And if you remember 05, 06, 07, those were good years. And that commitment was easily done. And when I say self-led and all private, what I mean by that is self-led. It was just volunteer business people who wanted to lead the private effort, all collectively got together, decided what they wanted to do to complement the public funding, and they went out themselves and raised the money themselves. And that was actually done almost prior to my getting here. I was involved in it and to some extent, but then I finished it. But it had gotten, the groundwork had been laid before I actually showed up in 2005 here. And so all that went very well. And 3 years passed, we had some successes. And in 2008, it was time to think about that again. And we started again in the same fashion that we did in 2005. And about halfway through our effort, again, all private, all self-led, 2008 hit in full force. And quite frankly, everybody quit. They were challenged about funding, about committing to funding themselves, much less asking other people for funding as well. And so they kind of just stopped about halfway through our campaign. And we still had some good economic development activity during the 08 through 11 period. And we had some successes, and we were successful at the programming and at filling the need, I guess, the purpose. We had a lot of announcements, and jobs did keep coming in. We had to be very careful how we spent the money, but we managed to get through. But in 2011, we had a decision to make. Do we fold up the tent and declare victory, or do we refund the foundation and try to keep on going? And we did a lot of conversation about that and came to the conclusion that we needed to continue on and fund the foundation in a much more significant way, but for a longer period of time. And so that's when we made the decision to quit trying to do it ourselves and to go out and get a professional third party to help us do it. And that's where Convergent came in after a competitive process. We selected Convergent. And I guess down at the bottom of that slide, you're seeing focus on readiness, competition is intense, site selection is a process of elimination, not attraction. And I put that on there because that really was the message. That was the motivation behind going out and raising the money, really all 3 times. I worked very hard getting the message to my leadership and to my funding base here that while we're in a good spot in the state and in the country, we can't just depend on inherent advantages to be successful. Companies and states and companies are in a competitive process, and they want their locations to help them meet their competitive advantages. And so we have to step up our game because the competition is growing and is getting more intense. And we have to appreciate that the companies are going to the best place for them that's ready to go, not some place that's going to have to do a bunch of stuff after they make their decision. And so that was the message. And it's a pretty simple message. We just decided we were going to spend money to focus on readiness. And so that's how we phrased all campaigns that we have done so far. So Rick, if you'll move on to the next slide. And so we have been successful except for the 08 campaign, we have been successful in our fundraising. And I would say that there are several keys to that success. One is the leadership involved, I think, right from the get-go. And we even recognized this when we were doing it ourselves, that it's who you've got at the very top of the campaign that's gonna really make your difference. They're gonna be the ones whose faces are on the materials. They're gonna be the ones that are calling the other people that are gonna be the large donors. So you've got to have leadership not only who's well known and respected, but who can also write their check in a leadership way. So that's one key to success, is who you've got at the top. And it doesn't have to be a single person, it can be multiple people. In our case, we had 4 the largest employers in our community from different sectors of the community and different locations in the community. But we had 4 people to be co-leaders of our co-chairmen of our campaigns. The second thing I would say with our keys would be, what's your return on investment and the messaging about that. When we were considering our 2011 campaign, and you can see from the prior slide, we were more than tripling the amount of money we were going to ask for. We went out and did an ROI on the previous campaigns. That's something that at least Convergent does, is you develop your metrics and then they do an ROI on what if you do this over the 5 years, this is what the ROI is going to be. And that's all well and good, but you've got to be 5 years out before you see if the ROI worked or not. So in 2011, we asked Convergent to do an ROI on the 2 campaigns that we had done before. And that helped us with our messaging in the 2011 campaign. So I would say if you can do a strong ROI and message that does resonate with investors. And then I will say ongoing is the communication with those investors. We have at least 1 annual in-person event. We do regular email updates on things that are going on, and it's just staying in touch with your investors, and that's at all levels of investment, not just the big investors, but even the investor who at the lowest end of the spectrum needs that communication about what's going on and to feel connected. And even more so when we can't do an in-person event. So we're trying to put together maybe our annual event that we do in February. We hope we can go back to that being an in-person event, but we may try to do a Zoom event with everybody coming up. A couple of takeaways and what we found in doing the campaign with a third-party professional fundraiser is that the money is out there, even in tough economies. But you just got to know how to ask for it and how to set up to ask for it. And that's where I don't want to put a plug in necessarily, but I will, for Convergent, is that they repositioned the way we even thought about approaching our community about money. And I was quite, when they said, we're going to go ask this business over here for X, I was stunned that they could even think that way. But I was very pleasantly surprised that that the ask, for the most part, that were made were that they got the response they asked for. So don't be. I would say to folks that the money is out there, but you do have to ask for it, and you have to ask for it in the right way with the right people. And so that was where the guidance with the third party fundraiser was most helpful, as opposed to us doing it ourselves. And finally, I would say that you've heard hope is not a strategy, and that's true. You just can't hope that that companies are going to come and locate in your community. So it's not a development strategy, but it is a marketing strategy. And I would say the ROI in that messaging, what you're marketing is hope. You know, you're marketing but for these efforts, we hope that the community is going to be more competitive, that we're going to get more projects and be more successful, and the local economy is going to grow as a result. And that's what you're selling. So you're selling hope. But if you can back it up, and I would say in my last comment, and I'll move on, is that nothing sells like success. We've had the good fortune of a lot of good companies making location announcements here. We've had great results through the good years and through the tough years. And despite all the other stuff that you'll hear from me and from the other speakers, nothing is more important than having those successes to fall back on and point out that because you funded us and we had an organization out here that was consistent, that was active and proactive, because that was here in this community, we were able to take advantage of the opportunities that came along and create other opportunities that might not have otherwise occurred. And that's a great, compelling message. If you can point to bricks in the dirt, and jobs that are out there as the end result. That is the ROI that people can see and touch and feel and understand the impact from. So I wish those of you who are thinking about it or doing it, I wish you well. I'm happy to answer questions when we get to the end of the conversation, but those are the points that I wanted to make in terms of what we were doing in Alamance County.
Thanks, Mac. Let's see. All right, Joanna, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Well, good morning, afternoon. I don't know what day it is. I don't even know what time it is. Hey, everybody. So glad to be here. For those of you that don't know me well, I was the economic developer in Wayne County for 21 years prior to leaving there and coming to Apex. So I'm going to speak to a little bit, or rather, I'm going to speak to my experience in Wayne County with that organization. So the time frame was about 2007, 2009 for us. The EDO in Wayne County was your typical county funded, county managed, county operated EDC. And we had just transitioned to a private-public partnership with the county, the city of Goldsboro, and our private partners. So we had just transitioned to that. We had done an initial fundraising campaign. Quite honestly, it had mediocre results. That was in part, unfortunately, due to the untimely death of their principal. So that was not a great first experience for us. But anyway, the new organization, which was named the Wayne County Development Alliance, whom most of you know is now led by Mark Pope and his sidekick, Tiffany Creech. they decided, you know, we decided, let's go ahead and do another campaign. We need to, this was a kind of a misstep for our first time, but let's go ahead and do another campaign. Let's get a consultant in here to help us. And then the recession hit. And we were just kind of like, oh my goodness, what do we do? Next slide, Rick. So we were right there. And this is where, you know, those of you that are thinking about this today and we're having this pandemic, you're kind of like, okay, here we are. We should be having a fundraising campaign, but we have this disaster going on right now, whether it's a recession or a pandemic or a natural disaster. You know, what do we do? So the first thing that we decided was we were going to take a little bit more time in choosing our consultant. So we did use a little bit more discretion in that process. But the ideas or the considerations that we had, we kind of laid them all out on the table. So what do? We're in this bad situation. So one option, let's just not do it. Let's just not do a campaign. Let's just wait until the recession is over. Let's wait until whatever disaster, XYZ, is over and the economy is recovered. And then things will be fine and we can go back to our normal campaign. So that was one option. The second option we considered was we'll move forward, but we'll adjust our goal to a smaller goal. Our consultant, we'd already been through the process of determining what our goal should be. So we had that goal and we thought, well, we'll just readjust. We'll just maybe cut it in half or a third or 2/3, whatever that might be. We're going to go forward, but with a smaller goal. Another option was to move forward, but only contact investors that we thought would be really the least likely affected by the recession. So in this case, you could say, who are my investors that would be least likely affected by this pandemic? So that was one option. And we did look at who those investors could be and what we might be able to accomplish through that. And then of course, the fourth option was just proceed full steam ahead. Just take the original goal, proceed full steam ahead, and let's just see what happens. Next slide. So we took the bold route. We decided to proceed full steam ahead with our original goal. And I love this graphic here because you see the little goldfish, he's going to jump right over the intermediate bowl and go right to the big bowl. And that's kind of what we decided to do. Next slide. Okay, so to the point of this webinar, you know, why, how, and what? You know, how did you do that? Why did you do that? What were the thoughts there? So our goal was 1.2 million. That was our fundraising goal. This has been said by Mac earlier, so you'll see some common themes here, but we really had to make sure that we selected the key business leaders that would lead the way with their investment. So if we could really get those folks on board, even in this tough time, if we could get those leaders on board with their bold investment, with their bold risk maybe during this challenging time, we could hope that the others would as well. And then we asked ourselves a couple questions. We said, you know, if not now, when? I mean, who knows when the recovery is coming from the recession? Who knows when we're going to get a vaccine for this pandemic? Who knows when we'll ever go to phase 3 in North Carolina? You know, so who knows? So we just said that to ourselves, you know, if not now, when? We can just hold this off forever and then we'll just be sitting around on our thumbs indefinitely. And then the second question was, well, if not us, who? I mean, who's going to do this? Who else in your community is going to lead the charge for economic vitality? You guys all know it's you. It's the local EDOs, it's the partners out there. You know, if not us, then who? Everyone's looking to us to do something, to get this economy back going again. So if not us, who? And then the third piece, again, a common theme, is that we realized that our messaging not only had to offer an ROI, but it had to offer hope. And you might think that, again, you don't hear about that sometimes in economic development, but we had to give people something to hope for. We had to say, look, we're not just dreaming out here. We really are going to put that word into our message, and we did. And again, so a couple of takeaways just from this slide here is, you know, making sure you have that bold leadership that can lead the way. Asking yourself, say, you know, we can wait and we can hope for all these things to happen and make our situation better, or we can just go ahead and act right now and realize that, you know, time's a wasting. So let's not let that happen. And then again, if you're not doing this as an EDO or as an organization, if this is what you need to be doing, you know, who else is going to be doing this in your community? So it's really you. Next slide, please. Well, here are the results. We surpassed our goal in the height of the recession. We went out and our goal was 1.2 million. We raised 1.48 million. We got new investors. We got new investors we'd never had before. We had new investors that were both business or included businesses, individuals, foundations. They had never financially supported our economic development efforts. They may have been supporters in another way, but they had never financially supported. But again, we brought them in, we gave them the right message, we showed them our bold leadership, and we gave them not only an ROI, but we gave them a message of hope. Our economy in Wayne County, the economy remained very strong during the recession. I will say that was in part due to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. It does help to have one of those in your community. Anyway, but our economy overall remained very strong. And so what did we do, you know, with those increased funds? Well, this is 101, so I'm not telling you all anything new, but we were able to do enhanced programming for our BR&E programs, our workforce development programs. And then we just went about doing our normal business of recruitment and marketing, took it up a couple notches because we had more financial stability, and that resulted in what we all hope for, and that's the job creation and the capital investment. So that's just a real quick snapshot of what we went through and kind of how we turned it around in that challenging time. And I'll just stop my comments with, who doesn't love a picture of this guy with his winning attitude? So I'll answer questions when the time is, when the question and answer time comes up. Thank you.
That's great, Joanna. Thank you. And thank you, Charlie Sheen. All right, Steve Yost, you are up.
All right, good morning, everybody. Great to be here. And we're a little bit different from Joanna and Mac in that we are a regional economic development organization, as most of you know, that covers 18 counties in southeastern North Carolina. So our approach is a little bit differently, but certainly the fundamentals of fundraising for economic development are very similar to local economic development fundraising. So a little bit about background on how we got into fundraising at NC Southeast, and I think Rick in his introduction made a very accurate statement in that we were thrust into it back in 2012, but we were thrust into it in a very organized, planned way. Previous to 2014, we were one of 7 regional economic development commissions in the state. And NC Southeast was one of the 4 regional economic development commissions among the 7 partnerships. So in 2013, the state decided to defund the 7 partnerships of state funding and to abolish the 4 regional commissions. Prior to that, around 2010 into 2012, the state started budget cuts across the board for a lot of entities related to the Great Recession. At that time, we started looking at doing private fundraising to help fill in the gaps of the state public funding that we were losing. Since 1994, we had been funded by the state. Basically, it's 90% of our funding in operations with the organization. So we did a lot of research. We talked to private fundraising firms. We'd never done private fundraising with the organization. And like anything else we do at NC Southeast, we sit down, assess, and come up with a strategic plan on how to do it. And that's what we did with private fundraising. Started a campaign back in 2012, hired a firm, and began fundraising at that time. During that period of time, we had the state changes to regional economic development. That really became a part of overall organizational transition of our organization to a 501c6 nonprofit organization. And so during 2013-14, we were carrying out that organizational transition, and we used the public investors, private investors that we were bringing in to sort of help set the stage and form the new organization. So in 2014, we rolled into the 501c6, and we had a lot of private investment that we were successful in bringing on board to the organization. We had a goal of $1 million over 3 years. We exceeded that goal. And so we were able to start our new model in 2014 in a very solid financial position. Fundraising is an ongoing activity of ours. We're working on it all the time. We sort of like to say that fundraising never sleeps at NC Southeast, but we're very, very targeted in how we do that as a regional organization. Rick, go to the next slide, please. Some of our key points really based on experience and our engagement on fundraising are some of these that we've listed here. As I mentioned, we had never done it before, and I can tell you personally, I was intimidated about undertaking the process. In fact, probably in my 26-year economic development career, I never dreaded anything more than to start a private fundraising campaign. It was more the fear of the unknown than anything else, because we had not done it, and personally, I'd never really done it except with some civic organizations where I live. So, so we wanted to make sure we did it right, and I think conducting a very thorough assessment very early on, investing the funding and the time and the professional resources to do that was really key to later on executing a very successful campaign. And we were able to work with the fundraising firm to do that assessment, reach out to key business leaders in the Southeast region, and to really find out what the viability was for us to carry out a campaign. So we had some folks who were skeptical that we could carry this out because the region is such a rural region, and the question was, are the resources, are the private resources and the private funding out there to go after? We leveraged board member relationships. Joanna and Mac both touched on that. I think that's critical. You've got to have some champions in the beginning that are going to help you have a successful campaign, and those people have got to have relationships to businesses and high-level business leadership in your community, and we have that. We had one bank and its president, regional president, who really took on the mantle of our largest champion to get it started. One thing important to us as a regional organization is, since we cover 18 counties, we have several local organizations who do their own private fundraising. And so we made a deliberate effort in the very beginning to make sure that we did not impede on local economic development fundraising efforts. So with communities in our region that were raising money, we sat down with them in the beginning and just made sure we were complementary and not competitive for fundraising. So I can tell you a couple of times we had prospective investors that said, well, if I invest with NC Southeast, and I'm gonna have to cut my investment to the local organization. We passed on those opportunities. You know, Mike really touched on this really well. I think to be successful, you've got to provide a vision for investors, public and private, to buy into. Our county governments are the public side of us versus the state, and it sort of works the same with them. But you've got to have a vision and a plan that's going to create results in the region or your community. I think people want to buy into something that's a little larger than them that's really going to directly impact in a positive way economic growth. And so we already had the mission in place. We just sort of needed to tailor it to a fundraising campaign to communicate that to potential investors. And I think we did that very, very well. So we do 3-year strategic plans. We happen to be starting to do our third 3-year strategic plan right now. So the timing is good as we deal with some of the COVID impacts, not only to fundraising, but to our overall economic development programming and marketing with NC Southeast. You've got to demonstrate ROI results and value back to your investors. That's an ongoing activity. And you got to tell your story. And everybody has a story. If you can't tell that story, get somebody to figure it out for you. Because potential investors, ongoing investors, they want to know what those results are. That's what they're buying into. That's what they want to be a part of. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. We have learned. And so if you carry out a campaign, you've got a team with you, but I think you as the leader of your organization, as the director or CEO of your organization, you've always got to be there as part of that process. So we don't really ask our board members to do the ask. We ask them to leverage their relationships and their influence. I don't know of anybody who wants to get onto a board to raise money, but they will offer their value and influence to help get the job done. So Rick, I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Steve. So at this point, what I'm going to do is stop sharing the presentation here. And Mac, if you are there, we can, oh, there you go. Okay. So at this point, we've got a good 20 minutes or so. We're going to jump in and just do a bunch of Q&A. So everybody here, you can type questions in to the Q&A box here. And Mac, the first one that came across is for you. I'll read it for you. This is somebody that sounds like, well, and to set the stage, certainly there are chambers of commerce out there, there are economic development groups out there, and there are combined organizations like yours, Mac, or like Raleigh or Asheville. And so for Mac, how does work around economic development fundraising overlap with your work around the chamber fundraising? Are there investors involved in both programs, or how do you differentiate the two?
Thank you for asking the question. I saw it pop up and I was frantically messing around my screen trying, how do I answer this? How do I answer this? I'm glad you're doing that. And I appreciate the question because it's a good one. And I was concerned about that too, that the fundraising for the Economic Development Foundation would cannibalize our opportunities with chamber sponsorships and whatnot. And we found that to not be the case. A lot of our funders fund both. Which was a very pleasant surprise and reinforces my comment that the money is out there. You've just got to ask for it, to Steve's point, but you've got to make the value proposition. You've got to have results happening. And so we have to have results on the chamber side and on the economic development side. But we do have people that are supporting both. We do have some that are supporting just one or the other. And that works itself out. We don't not ask somebody because they're already a big supporter of the chamber. In fact, that might be viewed as the first place to start, is the people who are already making big investments on these bigger things, these forward-looking efforts to try to make the community better. So I wouldn't let, if somebody out there is in the same situation as I'm in, where they've got a chamber and an economic development group, I wouldn't let that stop anybody from making an ask. To Steve's point, if you don't ask, you know what the answer will be. I'll also say that the chamber is we're the recipient. The chamber is the recipient of the public money that supports economic development. So we have public money supporting the chamber side, which helps us keep the fundraising for the foundation are 100% private. In many campaigns, you will see big chunks of the fundraising coming from the city or county governments and that sort of thing. And that adds to that total in the fundraising. Here, in all three campaigns, at no point has there ever been any public money into the foundation that was doing the fundraising. It's all been 100% private. And so, but that's because the public money comes to the chamber, and it's that public-private partnership that works. I hope that's helpful. If it's not, I'll be happy to have a phone call, just me and you or whoever, later on if you want to talk more about that.
Thank you, Mac. And one of the things we're going to do is share the PowerPoint with everybody. And one of the final slides has contact information for all four of us. So you can feel free to reach out to any of the panelists here with real specific questions. I'm going to ask a few questions that came in before the webinar from the survey that Liz sent out earlier this week. There was somebody who's looking at running a capital campaign, and all three of you have run one. In terms of the length of that campaign, Joanna, WCDAs were 5 years. Steve, it sounds like you were going in 3-year increments. Mac, you did both 3 and 5 year. Do you have a preference? How did you determine whether it should be 3, 4, or 5? I've seen them all across the board.
I'll start, I guess. We didn't want to have to do it so often. And that's the honest truth. We thought, 5 just seemed like a good round number. It wasn't too, we thought 7 or 8 might be too far out. We thought 3, it might take us a year to get some of those pledges coming in. And that's year 1, and then you had year 2 and 3. So we felt like 5 felt like the right number. We felt like it was long enough also to give us time to accomplish some of the goals that were set as a result of these campaign funds coming in. So we wanted to give ourselves, enough time in between goals where people didn't feel fatigue, and then also time to accomplish the goals set in the campaign process.
I think, go ahead, Mike.
After you, go ahead.
Well, our reasoning, I think, and going with a 3-year time period was that we were also in the middle of a transition of our organization, and frankly we needed to get some funding built into the organization, and so we thought a 3-year increment would be good. But it also sort of aligns with what I mentioned earlier, is that we do our strategic plans on 3-year increments, and so we can sort of align what our 3-year planning, strategic planning are for marketing, product development, whatever, along with that fundraising. We only did the one campaign, so we do any ongoing fundraising internally with a couple of partners, but that was sort of our reasoning on why we did 3 years.
And I'll just chime in by echoing what Joanne said. 3 years goes by really quick, especially if you're the one writing the check. You were just here, kind of thing. And so it does kind of spread it out. Plus, in a community like ours, that we're not overrun with lots of people with big pocketbooks. We got a whole lot of people with medium to small pocketbooks. And there are other community partners out there that are necessary to be a community that are also fundraising, the YMCA, the Arts Council, and our donors are also on their list too. And they feel like they've got responsibilities to not just us, but to other places that are also important to the community and to the donors. And so it helps give some of those others a chance to get their causes funded as well, without dipping too much into the same pocketbooks too often. And so 5 years worked well, and I completely agree with Joanne's comment that you've got to almost have something already in the wings for a 3-year thing to show a success. You've almost got to have something right out of the get-go. And as you know, projects don't happen that quickly sometimes. And now in COVID, I've got several projects who've gotten to a point and stopped because COVID has stopped travel and other things that the companies need to do on their side to make something work. So that's been a particular challenge in the COVID period, is that the pandemic is actually on the company side. I'm ready to go. But on the company side, this pandemic has stopped their internal working that they need to move forward with a project.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, Mac. And you mentioned something there that caught my attention. There's no shortage of fundraising that's taken place in any community, right? So you got the YMCA, maybe the Boy Scouts, the community college, the hospital. How did each of you, how are you positioning the fundraising you're doing, especially in tough times where funding is being pulled back and everybody needs it? You go to any banker in town and they've got a stack of requests this high. How are you positioning your fundraising? And Joanna, how did you position yours back with WCDA to differentiate what you're doing versus all the others?
Well, I think the big one, and I think we all touched on it, is, our ask has an ROI. We are going to come in and show you, Mr. Businessman, if you invest XYZ dollars, let me show you what that's going to mean for your business and the economy of your local community. And that resonated very well with the folks. So it's not a message of do this because it's the right thing to do. It's do this or consider this because here's the return you're going to get personally. Here's the return you're going to see in your community. And I think the other thing to remember is you do want to go to those people, those organizations that are giving to other organizations. So don't think that, well, they already give to the Boys Club and the Arts Council and hear that they're not going to give to economic development. Yes, they will. If they're philanthropic, if they are corporately minded, community minded, they will give. And I also kind of sometimes reckon the campaigns to, think about the Red Cross. They come in when there's a disaster, and sure enough, people that have never given blood before, they're lining up to give blood, or they're raising money at a lemonade stand. The little kids are to give money for these natural disasters or whatever's happening in that community or even across the state. Well, the recession, that was a disaster. That was a disaster for us. It was an economic disaster. And so we just treated it like that. We said, hey, when there's a natural disaster and the Red Cross comes in, you all are giving your blood, you're giving your money, you're giving your time, you're going out and serving meals. Well, we're having an economic disaster, or we're having a pandemic disaster, and we still need you to give. We still need you to come in and give your blood, give your money, give your time, whatever it is you're asking. So I kind of use that Red Cross example a little bit to give a little boost to people.
Rick, if I can jump in on this point too about the timing also is one that allows us to be flexible. For example, we're on a five-year rotating plan right now, but given the economics of this past year, and we're about up to start talking about planning for the next campaign, I might have to go out 6 years just to give the economy time to recover. So part of having the 5-year campaign, it gives me time to understand how things are going. And if I have to moderate the spending so I can maybe lengthen the time between campaigns to another year or so to extend it out, I've got some latitude for that. And that's what I'm finding myself in the middle of right now. Under normal circumstances, with the economy good, I'd probably all in for starting the planning for next year's campaign, because it takes about that long to get people lined up and to get the messaging right and get your numbers verified and all of that, and then to get the infrastructure set in place, go through the consultant picking process again if that's the case. So it takes a while. So you already got a year before a campaign a good one might go, and then if you got a bad economy that you're coming out of, you might need one more year on top of that just to give the economy time to recover. So we're finding ourselves in that boat right now of fortunately managing our money that we did get so that we can have some flexibility with the timing.
That's good. Thanks, Mac. Thanks, Joanna. Hey, we just got another question here from Kathy Jackson. How much of your funding comes from private individuals rather than businesses? Do you target individuals?
almost all of ours is from private business. We don't, if there's any individuals, this is an interesting approach. We're a 501c3. And so what I think we do get some money from individuals, but it is from an account that they've created with another foundation somewhere else. And they've said to that foundation, we want you to give my money to this foundation, meaning the one I'm representing. So that's probably an individual who's given to a foundation, a community foundation, and they've directed that foundation to give on their behalf money to my campaign. Otherwise it's business.
I'd say I'd say that the majority of our investors were a business or a foundation, or the municipality or what have you. But we did target some individuals in our community, and those individuals were, well, let me back up. So we had different levels of giving. So we had gold, silver, bronze. And so in the bronze level, which was the lowest level, we went after some individuals, the retired community college president, the retired hospital CEO, people that had been partners of ours in the past, that were maybe in a position, we felt they were maybe in a position financially to invest, but we went to them with our lowest bronze level, which was a pretty easy ask for the most part. So we did go out and target some very specific individuals. The majority of them had retired, or maybe they were independently, a family situation had them independently wealthy, and so they had a little extra cash in their pockets, just ready to donate to our campaign.
I would say that, Rick, that was very similar to us. We were able to target a handful of individuals, but they ultimately were connected or tied to giving that maybe they had done to foundations or to other things, civic organizations or whatever it might be. But we had a connection or a relationship to them, either directly or through someone else, and to ascertain if they had interest in regional economic development support. But by and large, it's companies and organizations that we target and who contribute to the organization.
And certainly, I think that's been our experience as well. I think where we have succeeded in bringing some individuals to the table is when we have some landowners who obviously have a real vested interest in economic development. And so we've seen them come in some cases, pretty substantial levels. But I'd say by and large, the majority are businesses and foundations. One of the questions we had submitted before the webinar, really talking about COVID. We talk about the economic conditions now and how similar they are to 2008, 9, 10, 11. Mac, Steve, you guys are both out there. Mac, you're on the receiving end of pledge payments from your last campaign, but Steve, you're out there continue because you ask for money every single year. What's changed? What are you changing about the messaging? How are you staying in touch with your investors? Are you seeing an impact from COVID? Or is your collection rate still strong, or is it starting to drop?
Well, yeah, we've seen a little bit of an impact, but we have worked really hard on several things to address the COVID impacts. And one of those is to do the pivots, the changes in our programming to deal with COVID. We're all having to go virtual on marketing and recruitment. We really, I think, have gotten ahead of the curve on that successfully, and we've communicated that to our investors, to our board members and allies. I think that was the first thing we wanted to do, is to assess what we needed to change or what redirection we needed to go in terms of our mission and how to best execute it and continue to get results despite all the COVID impacts. And so we did that first, and then we started really just touching base with all of our investors. We've always had good communication on investor relations, which obviously is an ongoing activity, but we really got out there and increased the frequency contacts and to see what sort of value or assistance that we could provide to them on any of the federal legislation that's coming down, whatever the case might be. So I think that was really important. And the other thing is just communicating, and I think Joanna touched on it a second ago, is economic development's now more important than ever before. This is the time where everybody, public and private, need to hang together and sort of double down and figure out how we're going to continue to get economic growth. And so it's even more imperative, I think, that a private entity stay engaged if they're able to do so. Now, impacts to them, to their business could be so great that they've got to pull out of those things. So, the impact to us has been minimal so far, which we're pretty pleased with. But we'll see how things go as COVID continues.
And I would echo a lot of those same sentiments. Our collection rate continues to be really strong, and again, we continue to show results. And nothing, again, I can't say it enough, that if you've got announcements coming in and new jobs and new investment coming in, that is what people wanted to see. But in addition, just beyond just that, we've expanded our programming. We've been very active and proactive in helping create an apprenticeship program for workforce development. Our foundation put in the seed capital for a brand new small business loan program, which we just announced on Monday of this week with a community partnership of others. So we're trying to be out there, being proactive, putting together more programming that can have direct benefit beyond just the tax base and the payrolls that come in with the jobs, other direct benefits to funders and the business people. And then the communication part. I haven't gotten through the whole list. I think I've got 70 or so investors. I've personally phone called almost all of them. I've got some remaining to do, but I personally, and I told them, this isn't a fundraising call. You may think it is, but I'm not. I don't know if we even do or not. But I know you are an investor. You're an important part of our economy. How's it going? And I've had all kinds of stories about how it's going, and it depends on who you talk to about how it's going. But the contact and the communication is, I think, it's an ongoing thing. To Steve's earlier point, if you're fundraising and you're depending on private sector fundraising, you're always on in that regard, whether you're in a specific campaign or not.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mac and Joanna and Steve. I'm amazed at how quickly time flies when you're talking about economic development and fundraising, one of my favorite topics here. So we are going to wrap up, and I had planned to do just a quick overview, keys to successful fundraising. I'm actually not going to go through this just because in the interest of time, because everybody that participated in this is going to get a copy of this PowerPoint. What I am going to do, Julie, is turn it back over to you to go ahead and wrap everything up here and let everybody know that we do have contact information for the four of us in the PowerPoint that's going to go out to everybody. So please feel free to reach back out and ask anybody some more specific questions as they come to you. So Julie, it's all yours.
All right, I'd like to offer a big thank you to Rick Kiernan and our all-stars, Joanna, Mac, and Steve, for sharing that valuable insight. We appreciate your expertise. I'd like to thank Rick and your colleagues at Convergent Nonprofit Solutions for presenting today's webinar. And let's offer one final shout out to our annual sponsors. Their support is vital to everything NCEDA is and does. Also, I'd like to mention that we have more webinars coming up this month, including the rescheduled From Calm to Crisis, Tips and Tools for Marketing and Communicating, which will take place Wednesday, August 12th at 2 p.m. Registration is also open for our 2020 annual conference, which will be held virtually on August 26th. Please make plans to join us for that and visit the NCEDA website for more details. Thanks again to our members and guests for joining us today. We hope to see you in person soon. Until next time, please stay safe, stay confident, and stay connected.